This is part two of our conversation about Genesis. Actually, it's less a conversation than a monologue. But if you email me or you try to Skype with me, it will be more of a conversation. Um, so we chatted, we discussed, we defined some terms to begin with. And I told you, of course, that this is my own particular reading or interpretation of Genesis. Please don't assume this is the only way to interpret Genesis. It's a complex narrative. Let's begin with this question. What does the act of creation look like? So go to Genesis. Um, Notice simply, and again, remember, we're trying to think about sin, which is separation, which I connect with individualism. We're trying to think about more largely what does the Jewish story of the origin of all life say about how humans should be related to one another? What does it say about how humans end up feeling separate from the world, right? Um, does this origin story gives us some kind of recommendation about how we should live in the world? That's the kind of you know that's the kind of essential question I'm always interested in. So notice in the first chapter that much of what God is doing, God, who is the great individual, if there's someone who exists on his, her own, some people think God is female, that's why I add the her. If there's someone who exists on his or her own, it's God, right? God exists as an individual. Nothing pre-exists God. That's what Christian theology would say at any rate. Jewish theology, I'm not as familiar with, so don't quote me on that. But notice what happens here constantly. There's all these moments of separation. Let there be light, and there was light. God saw the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. If you read closely the first chapter, what we see is categorization. We see all of these kind of moments of division. Now, individualism, of course, is about is about division, right? It's about there's the self, border, there's the rest, right? So the Bible seems to open up with all of these sort of separations, all these borders are put in place, all these divisions are put in place. It seems to open up that way. And of course, at the end of this first chapter, is that right? Let's see. Um, God creates man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created he them. Now it's a fascinating little moment, right? Some theologians say, look at this. Male and female, he created them. Some theologians suggest that humans originally were in fact both male and female. All right, so I'm blowing certain people's minds, but yes, there are people who have made this argument. This is chapter 1. Strictly speaking, of course, we haven't heard the exact, the more specific story of the creation of Adam. Go to chapter 2. Here are my little sticky notes here on the side. Notice what happens here. All right, God has finished work, and now, I mean, it's all been very general in the first chapter, right? Now we're getting more specific. We've already heard the origin story of how humans were created. Now we're going to get it again, okay? Um, Here we go. I think this. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Now, our concern is nature, humans in relationship with nature. What does this tell us? Right? It tells us that humans were born in the dirt. I mean, not only is it a message of mortality, infinitude, that humans are finite, but it tells us that our substance, our very essence, comes from the dirt, from the soil, from nature. We are bound up in nature, right? Remember, humanism. This humanism is the tendency to see humans at the center of all creation and othering or separating humans off from the rest of the world. But here in the Jewish story, Humans are born in the dirt. The dirt is the essence, the beginning. But not just that, of course. God breathes into this construction, and man lives as a result. So down here a little bit longer, a little bit farther. I don't know how deep I want to go into this. The story essentially is this: there are two trees in the Garden of Eden. There's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and there's the tree of life. God says you can eat of all the trees, including the tree of life, which will give you immortality, but you should not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Humans don't make a distinction, in other words, between good and evil before eating of this tree. Sin, right? Sin, which leads to separation, begins at the moment that humans disobey God and eat of this tree. They eat of the tree, they feel they're separated from God, but they're also separated in other ways. I mean, think about the name of the tree. The tree is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Before eating of this tree, humans did not make that distinction. One of the most basic distinctions, right? There's self versus other. There's mind versus body. One of those other basic distinctions is there's good and there's evil, and those things are totally separate. Humans didn't make that distinction between the fall. I don't believe they did based on this story. So, and so God says, I don't want you to eat of this one tree. And as long as you don't eat of this one tree, you are going to stay in the garden forever. But humans, of course, eat of that tree. And that's the origin of sin. They disobey God in a moment of selfishness. They take of this tree, and that leads to lots of things we're going to talk about in chapter 3. But let's notice this. It says here, verse 18, chapter 2, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Now, I think this is hilarious, right? At this point, God then stops. God does this thing where he's looking at all these creatures, right? And God is asking man to give names to all the livestock. I think this is a funny little moment, which suggests that God was looking through all the animals for a helper suitable for man. I mean, that's what 19 was about. Because then we see this, but for Adam, no suitable helper was found. God was looking at animals for a helper. Couldn't find one. So God causes man to fall asleep and takes out of the man a rib. And out of that rib, woman is created. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. Now, lots of fascinating things here. One, the biblical record says humans are dependent. They need helpers, right? Humans are dependent not just on the earth of which they are made, but fellow humans, right? So we have dependency. We have interrelationship built into this story. I think that's important. Notice also this wonderful example, and you're going to be writing a lot about gender this week, right? Man may be made out of the earth, but woman is made out of the essence of man, which of course means that women are also connected with the earth. But think about this as a metaphor of mutuality or interconnection. Men and women share the same flesh. They share. It's almost an image of being connected bodily, right? So we have all these images of interconnection and intimacy, right? We have God walking in the garden with Adam and Eve, and of course Adam and Eve are naked. To be naked is to have a kind of intimacy and relationship with the world around you. I think it's an obvious metaphor. God is walking with these naked people who feel no shame over their nakedness. There's an intimacy, there's a communion. All of this is before the fall. This is Ubuntu. We talked about this in the first video. This is interrelationship. This is community. No division. There's intimacy. There's no separation. At the moment that humans put on clothing, at that moment we start seeing a separation, right? All these great images of intimacy then. Let's move to the next chapter. So at this moment, we have the story of the fall. We have the snake who tempts the woman. And of course, classically, one of the origins of patriarchy, one of the origins of sexism is this chapter, to some degree, because it is the woman who is tempted by the snake. It is the woman who falls for the temptation. Now, if you read closely in the biblical record, I'm not sure if I can find it immediately, it says something about Adam being there alongside. It implies that Adam was right there with her. At any rate, incredibly important moment for gender studies at this moment. So, what happens when the woman takes the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? She knows good. She understands the distinction between good and evil, right? There's a sense of separation. There are good things, there are bad things. You're categorizing, you're separating. They're not mutually bound up. There are certain religions, certain world philosophies that see good and evil as dependent on one another. One cannot know good without knowing evil. One cannot know evil without knowing good, right? This is a moment where good and evil are separated. That distinction is made. This is the moment when, of course, Adam and Eve put on clothing because they are naked. So now they're separating themselves off from others in a really concrete way. I'm putting on clothing and I'm separating myself from you. This is the moment where God says, you can't stay in the garden anymore. Cast man and woman out of the garden. That's another image of sin or separation. This is the moment, and really, really important moment. There are three curses. And God, these are the three curses. These are the moments of alienation and separation. God says, because you have disobeyed me, and of course that disobedience is also an act of separation. When humans disobeyed God, they were separating themselves out from communion from God, right? There are three curses, right? I'm not going to concern myself with the snake, but God says, woman, from now on, instead of just those babies popping out, I'm going to make childbirth painful for you. You are cursed with pain. When you have children, it will be painful. Your body, in essence, will fight against you. 2, God says, because of this sin, you will desire your husband and he will rule over you. He will have power over you. He will be at the top of the hierarchy, right? That's 2 curses, all right? Third curse, directed to Adam. Cursed is the ground because of you. Cursed is nature because of you. From now on, when you go and try to grow things, it will be difficult. Nature will fight you. You will be in, it will be a war between you and nature. Now, really important, these 3 curses after the fall, right, are all very much about dualism. They're all very much about separation and violation. Woman, your body will fight you. Man, you will now be the head of the household, and you will rule in what strikes me as a pretty violent way. You will be, at the end of the day, it's not a democracy. You will be the one ruling over the woman. And 3, God says, used to be you could just plop fruit off of the trees. Man, now you're going to have to work. You are going to have to fight nature to be able to feed yourself. Now, all 3 of these examples are examples of tension, violation of dualism. Now, you're going to be able to, hopefully, you can pull these things together, and I do suggest you rewatch this, right? But our goal is to think about, 1, before the fall. This is where God wanted us to be before the fall. Before the fall, I think there's a lot of strong evidence that in the Jewish story that God wanted us to be mutually connected to one another. God wanted us to be bound up in relationship. After the fall, because of sin, there are all these examples of individualism, dualism, and violence, right? What are the political, ethical, moral consequences of seeing nature as against you, right? As opposed to seeing nature or woman or man as a helpmate, a helper. What does it mean to rule the earth and nature and woman before the fall, as opposed to ruling after the fall? Because ruling is mentioned twice here, and I bet the notion of ruling is vastly different in both cases. Please email me if you have any questions, and thank you.